I'm busy typing, but it's fine within.
So, nah, that's fine, my brother. So we can start admitting there. Brother D?
Yes, we can start admitting. I've admitted the parliamentary streaming already.
Sure, my brother.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, honorable members, and to the team from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Let me just check whether I'm audible to anybody. Denver, are you on there?
Good morning, Chairperson. You are audible.
Thank you very much. I see the number of honorable members who are here. Honorable Mkonto, you have been sorely missed. Let me greet you especially because we missed you on our oversight. How are you doing?
Good morning, Chair. Thanks for checking. I'm doing well.
You know,
I
these have been very
missed you
difficult. These have been very difficult times politically. So I thought, let me just check up on you.
I missed you too, Chair. All of
Hey,
you.
you should have been with us in the Eastern Cape. I think we needed the fighters there. It is quite a fight in the Eastern Cape.
I'm sorry I was not there, Chair.
No, understood. And we did note your apology, Honorable Mkonto. But honorable members, I think given that today is a continuation in some ways of a meeting that we held that began last week with our engagements with institutions of higher learning, and that today we begin to engage the question around the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, I think it's important that we get on with the business of today. And therefore, in the light of that, I want to begin the meeting so that we can proceed on time and timelessly. So, Denver, if I can ask you just to flight the agenda for today. On the agenda for today is obviously we will have a presentation strictly by NSFAS, and then there are a number of minutes that we've got to take and a few announcements that we've got to make. So in the light of that, is there a member who will move for the adoption of the agenda today?
Chair, I move for the adoption of the agenda.
Good morning, Honorable Mwali. Thank you very much. Nice to see you. And I noticed that Honorable Kalega Mazibugo's hand is up, which I will assume is to second the adoption of the agenda. Is that correct, Honorable Kalega?
It's correct, Honorable Chair. I second, and as I also welcome Honorable Mkonto back to the team.
Yes, that motion is carried. Let me, in the light of that, then proceed. Given the agenda today, I want to officially open this meeting. I want to welcome all the honorable members. Let me proceed quickly by acknowledging the fact that this is obviously a conversation about, so for the context of NSFAS to be clear, is that this has been an issue about the learning and culture function, which is the second highest expenditure on our national budget. In the light of that, we've also had engagements with WUSU and have gotten a briefing on what happens in some instances at Fort Hare. So we are in the grips of a crisis that speaks to the challenge of what's happening now at our higher education institutions, the University of the Free State being one, and a few others. Now, we have had a number of questions about how students are experiencing this. We also, as an oversight committee, went to a TVET college to engage students, the SRC, and the learners there. Now, the moral imperative of NSFAS can never be underscored. Of course, we want young people who get to higher education and make it affordable for all citizens to be able to get there. The operationalization of that becomes a conversation, which is the purpose of today. So we are going to be strict and erudite, honorable members, today, because there are some deep frustrations with NSFAS on all sectors: students, educators, institutions. I'd like to hear what the department's view is, etc. So we are going to go through that. Let me, in the meantime, recognize, are there any apologies? Denver, you sent me a few. A note, Honorable Lekhanyan, who seems to be busy with a small matter on the side there called a commission of inquiry into political interference into the security cluster. It's a sideline issue, I know, but he seems to be busy with that. Are there any other apologies, Denver?
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. You are correct. We received apology from Honorable Lekanyane, as well as the Deputy Minister of Finance, Honorable Sarapin. That's all apologies we have, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Are there any other apologies from any other member who want to be recognized? Honorable Talega Mazibu.
Thank you, Chair. My apology was forwarded to Mr. Mashile, but I am traveling. I will be boarding at 11:10. I hope we will be almost done by the time, but I'm boarding at 11:10. I'm en route to Cape Town. Thank you.
Noted, honorable member. Are there any other apologies from any other party or member on the platform? Okay. With those apologies being dispensed, let me recognize the team and the leadership from NSFAS. I am not sure. I'm always conscious of the fact that there is an advertisement for the CEO to come to looking to appoint a new one. So I'm unclear who will be leading the presentation, but I want to recognize NSFAS and allow them to be able to open the proceedings for today. Now, let me be clear to the team there. We have the presentation. This is not a reading workshop. I'm going to give you, having read through the presentation, you only have about 15, 20 minutes of input that you can make, and then members will begin to deliberate on some of the issues, because many of the issues require questions that you need to respond to. So with that, I'm timing it. Denver, will you please put a timer on for 20 minutes? At 15 minutes, we'll warn NSFAS, and then we'll proceed from there. Let me recognize, I don't know who's leading the team from NSFAS. Welcome. Mashile, I don't see anyone here from NSFAS, if I'm not mistaken.
Good day, Chair. Okay.
Yes, hi. Yes, you can proceed. The device is named Lihle, or am I mistaken? Lihle T.
Good morning, Chair and members. The person that will be leading the delegation from NSFAS is our acting Chief Operating Officer, Vuyo. She was having connection issues, but I think she is sorted now. And I'd also like to render an apology on behalf of our acting CEO, Wasim Karim, who was not able to join us today. My name is Lucia Changela, and I'm currently the acting CFO of NSFAS. Thanks, Chair.
Can I ask you, Honorable Member, and all the presenters, just by way of protocol, we prefer that you put your video on also, so that we can see you. Otherwise, we might as well have a telephonic conference call, and the parliamentary streaming service is on here. So if I can ask that if anyone wants to make an input, your video does need to be on, unless there are compelling reasons why not. So I recognize the apology from the CEO, acting CEO. I recognize that. It doesn't mean that I find it acceptable, given that the only reason I'm willing to live with it is because we've changed the appointment a few times. And so I'm willing to live with the absence of the leadership there, but we can proceed. Denver, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just to inform you, the acting CEO, Mr. Karim, has just joined now.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Karim. Let me ask from the NSFAS team, who will be taking us through the presentation? Is it the acting CEO or is it Vuyo? Because I am a bit puzzled at this point. And I apologize by addressing you by your first name. It's not because of any other thing. It's just that's what the device is named as. But for following on from that, I'm not sure about the organogram at NSFAS at this point in time. So let me allow the acting CEO to speak through the issue.
Yeah, thanks, Honourable Chair, and apologies for the slight confusion. I'm required to give testimony in a disciplinary hearing today, so I did not want to say I'll be present for the meeting and then I'm required to be on the witness stand. So I just tendered an apology in advance, just to indicate that. They've not resumed with the hearing, so I should be able to take members through the presentation, but I might be able to need to drop off when it's the question and answer session. So if it's okay with the Honourable Chair, then my acting CFO and the acting COO will then respond to any questions. I think they're fully equipped, but I'll stay on the call as long as I can, Chairperson.
That's fine. As I did indicate that we will take the presentation for 15 minutes and then allow members to begin to go through it. So just to avail the time so that we use our time with in the most efficient manner possible, because as I did indicate before, thank you for circulating it. The members have it. The questions are deeper than the presentation sent to us. So let me allow you, CEO. Thank you for being here. You can proceed with the presentation accordingly. And I do recognize the fact that you've indicated that you have another matter of a disciplinary hearing. So I respect that, and I know that you will then have to leave when you need to leave. But if you've got 20 minutes for this presentation, I think that would be great for you to take us through it. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you so much for understanding, Chair. Chair, if the Secretariat could just allow me to share my screen. All right. Greetings, Chairperson, and greetings, members of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. Our presentation is not long. We have stuck to what was prescribed in the letter to us. So we'll cover in the presentation the budget deficit that we faced for 2025, the projected implications for 2026, as well as an update on our student accommodation. If we reflect, and I think, Chairperson, it's just important for us to take a step back and remember the context of NSFAS and the shift away from being a loan-funded model towards a bursary-funded model, decision which was taken in 2017, but implemented from the 2018 year onwards. That decision has become more pronounced in terms of its financial implications over the last 3 academic years. So if we look at the last 3 academic years for NSFAS, you'll see a growth in university students of about 10% every year, from about 510,000 to about 561,000 to about 618,000. If you look at the budget, and that's looking at the university budget that's allocated from the National Treasury that flows through the Department of Higher Education and Training, that budget grew by 6% from 2023 to 2024 and grew by about 3%, which is consistent with the allocations from National Treasury across government. If you look at the expenditure side, expenditure grew from about 38 billion by 13% to about 43 billion, to by another 15% to about 49.3 billion. And that has resulted in cumulative deficits year on year. In 2023, we faced a deficit of 2.3 billion. In 2024, that deficit almost doubled to 5 billion. And in 2025, the deficit again doubled to about 10 billion. If you look at the last column in terms of what we're spending on students in terms of suite of benefits, that grew 2% year on year and then by 4%. So if we look at our growth in the budget is relatively stable. Our growth in terms of what we're spending per student is relatively stable. Where we really have a challenge is in terms of the number of students which are qualifying for the scheme. And these budget deficits are arising from the fact that we have an increasing number of students qualifying for higher education. Our basic education system is year on year producing more bachelor passes, which enable more young people to qualify to access higher education. But we also know that on the other hand, we have a cost of living crisis, which has pushed more households into the NSFAS eligibility criteria. We also know that due to the physical pressures, state resources are declining in real terms. And unfortunately, in the university sector, there's been no enrollment planning or capping. There's not been a policy change, which means that in terms of the current policy, all eligible students have a right to be funded. This just breaks down the deficit across universities and TVETs. It's far more pronounced in the university sector. In the TVET sector, it's much more controlled in nature. Now, for this year, we faced a pronounced, so we had an 11.6 billion deficit. Once we added the second semester registrations, that grew to almost about 14 billion rand. And because of the policy guideline, we could not arbitrarily block students from registering for the 2025 academic year. And we were required to reprioritize funds to be able to ensure a stable 2025 academic year. In this regard, we were able to use funds from historical debt, which was unspent, from recoveries from the Special Investigating Unit. The Department of Higher Education and Training supported us with about an additional 4.3 billion from the National Skills Fund. We utilized previous NSFAS surpluses of about 4.4 billion, and DHET assisted us with almost an additional billion rand to fund the parity living allowance. That left us with about close to about 700 million remaining deficit, which the university sector helped us to absorb for the 2025 academic year. Our reserves were made up of cash and cash equivalents. And if we use the Treasury formula and we remove our ring-fenced cash balances as well as our current liabilities, that is the breakdown of our cash reserves for the year. Now, Chairperson, just because 2025 is stable and all students have been funded, it does not mean that this problem goes away. If we look at the allocation for 2026, and if we were to strictly adhere to the 2026 university budget, we would be able to take on board about a maximum amount of 500,000 to 520,000 students. And more, the National Treasury is placing pressure on us to enforce Section 14 of the NSFAS Act, which requires us and any other public entity in terms of the PFMA to spend only in accordance with your allocated budget. However, we need to consider what the impact of this is, particularly in a very volatile sector in which we work, because this represents withdrawal of funding to approximately 100,000 students in the 2026 academic year. If we look at just students that we need to carry, because university degrees are not once off, they are usually 3-year or 4-year degrees. Given the carry-through cost of the students that we currently have on our books, it could be the smallest intake of first-time students in the last decade. And this represents the potential for major volatility and instability in the 2026 academic year. We were able for 2025 to open our registration portal to upload registrations for 34,000 block students and 15,000 second semester students. So for the 2026 academic year and the medium-term expenditure framework, a technical team of the Department of Higher Education and Training, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, National Treasury, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, and the Presidency has been established to support enrollment planning, reform, as well as sustainable funding framework for the university sector. And we are expected to take recommendations to Cabinet before the end of the year to propose what would be reform and stability for 2026. I'll skip over this slide, Chair. If we move to student accommodation, I think it's again important, Chairperson, just to reflect a little bit on how we would have arrived at this process of student accommodation, right? Student accommodation used to be a function that was held by institutions. That is, institutions would manage both university residences, campus residences, as well as private accommodation. And over time, there was a number of findings that, and of course, those costs would be claimed from NSFAS for NSFAS funded students. But over time, there was a number of complaints about the type of accommodation that students were residing in. And there was a degree of pressure on NSFAS on what oversight mechanisms it was exercising as it related to the student accommodation function. Now, NSFAS in 2023 decided to embark on the pilot project where it would take on board some functions of student accommodation for some institutions, and it would run the accreditation, the facilitation, the onboarding, as well as the payment process. Now, Chairperson, this process left a lot to be desired. There was no policy guidelines, framework, regulation that was issued to guide NSFAS in terms of how it would take over the student accommodation function. In addition to that, NSFAS did not necessarily build the skills and capability to be able to execute on what is quite a complex property management function for the sector. When the administrator and later the board and acting CEO was appointed, we inherited quite a chaotic situation where a number of service providers were not paid, students were facing the threat of eviction, and landlords were on the precipice of losing their properties. What we initiated was a series of working sessions across provinces aimed at offering individual assistance with payment-related issues and other concerns to accommodation providers. The initiative started at the end of July and ended on the 26th of September. Some of the issues that we resolved through the working sessions were students who were funded and were claimed from the wrong process cycles. Students were subsequently included in the next disbursement run. Landlords who had not yet signed their lease agreements and updated what they needed to do on those sides, and we managed to clear and pay those students. Clarity was given to students that were not eligible for payment due to them not being funded. Yet they were residing in properties where landlords were claiming for NSFAS students. Clarity was given regarding students that are not eligible for payment due to them not being funded for reasons. And in some instances, institutions had not confirmed allowance types for their students or had provided conflicting information. These are resolved monthly and students are included in subsequent disbursement runs. We also faced an issue with historical 2024 outstanding payments, and we requested resubmissions for both TVET colleges and universities. This measure was implemented to ensure that the invoices undergo validation and due diligence. They've now been received in the final stages of verification. Upon completion of this review, NSFAS will have a clear understanding of which accommodation providers are owed, and we anticipate finalizing this process by mid-October. NSFAS will communicate the confirmed payment dates thereafter to ensure transparency and provide clarity for parties involved. For the disbursements to date, this is as at 30th of September, we've disbursed about 4 billion rand to about 4,600 accommodation providers, accounting for 127,445 students. Now, in recognizing the challenges that have been faced in the past, NSFAS indicated what could be done to resolve the situation so that it does not perpetuate into future financial years. In this regard, we've developed a student accommodation protocol which outlines its commitment to ensure that eligible students have access to safe, affordable, and academically conducive accommodation during their period of study. It's developed in recognition of the critical role that appropriate living environments play in student well-being, academic success, and retention within higher education. The protocol aims to standardize the provision of accommodation support, promote quality and safety, and foster accountability. It does not aim to regulate all student accommodation, but its intention is to ensure that NSFAS-funded students reside in conducive environments. We've shared the protocol for public comment with USAF, SAPCO, SAUS, SAVETSA, and private accommodation associations. We are consolidating the input and will hold consultation sessions before the end of October. Chairperson, I'll pause the NSFAS presentation here now and hand back to the chair.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that call, Mr. Karim. May I then recognize members who would like to take some questions at this point to the CEO and then to the acting CEO, and then we can proceed on that score. If members keep their questions going, at least we can have a sufficient level of engagement. I recognize Honorable Waitlin, Konto, Bateman, Galega Mazibugo, and just for good measure, because I know he's going to tell me Honorable Mwali can't lift up his hand. So Honorable Mwali, I just recognize you just for the sake of it. And then Honorable Siate. So Honorable Waitlin, you go. You are recognized.
Good morning, Chair. Am I audible and visible?
Both, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to the Acting CEO, Mr. Karim, and your colleagues. Thank you for the succinct and very close and very quick presentation. I've got a number of concerns around NSFAS. I would like, obviously, Mr. Karim, I know that you are recently been appointed and that you recently have been appointed and you've got a new board, and we wish you well with the work that's going to continue, and we will see some good changes and turnaround strategy. And while we're on that, possibly if you could maybe highlight to the committee, do you currently have developed a turnaround strategy, and just maybe give us some highlights around your turnaround for the NSFAS? And the reason why I'm asking it relates to my second question, or your views on the possibility for academic institutions to manage or administer the funding for students on their own, and your view on that, because there is a number of institutions that have been called for and asked that if it's possible for them to be able to do that. And I know possibly legislation won't allow that, but just your view on that. And that brings me to the second part, and it's particularly on Section 14, and I know that it has been highlighted a number of times, particularly around Section 14B, C, and E of alternative or additional income sources that you are able to look at and find. In particular, one is like donations, and there's obviously others. And maybe just your view on that and where you are with regards to those additional sources or income streams for NSFAS. Then it brings me to the debt recovery. I just had a quick glance and I understood, and I want to just check with you if it's still the same, that only students that have registered prior December 2017 are accountable for their loans and not to pay back, and any other student beyond December 2017 don't have to pay back. And if so, is there a possibility that we can relook at that as a possibility, as a conversation, because it has become very clear that obviously that's very old debt, and if they are still recoverable from that point of view. Then it brings me to the question. Again, this week saw another article around the building lease. I think it was over 100 million. Where are we with that case? What is the issue with regard to that? Are we expecting any recoveries from that? And if you could just highlight that to us. Then there is a matter, and particularly in Tshwane, that we have picked up the possibility and implication of colluding between NSFAS officials and building owners of overpayment of accommodation. How do you make sure that that does not happen? And on what basis did you decide to measure the cost for accommodation against what is acceptable fees to pay for that? Then the last one is around your current, now we just
Honorable Wakelin, I think I might have lost you unless I'm the only one. Can anyone else hear Honorable Wakelin?
was actually not sure, and that concerns me. If AG can't even detect anything beyond what is 84 billion, and your position around, or what your plans are to intervene around your bid education process and your supply chain model, and what have you cleaned up that system, and what is your what are you going to do there? Then lastly, the matter of the closeout project. The one finding was that the closeout project between what the universities or the institution owes you versus what you owe them, and the cleanup process, where are you with that project, and when can we see the end of that? Thank you, Chair. I'll be done.
Thank you, Honorable Wakelin. Let me recognize Honorable Mkhonto.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you, Chair, honorable members, and the NFSAS team. Chair, I will request that I switch off my video. I have a challenge of network. I can be cut off anytime.
No, that's fine, Honorable Member. We can proceed.
Chair, I thought we will be briefed as to exactly what are the causes of these violent protests by students in some of the campuses. Generally, what are they complaining about? Because I think we can't discuss any other things without looking at what are the students complaining about, and generally so. Is there any plan to address the complaints of the students? And another thing, Chair, I did not hear in the presentation as to, we all know this system of higher education is an open system. There is an input and an output. And we are told that there has been a high volume of input, maybe more than anticipated. But then what about the output? How does it help in terms of the funds that have to be planned for each and every academic year? Chair, I would also want to know what is the total amount incurred through wasteful and fruitless expenditure during the period under review in almost all the universities, because we get from the news, one university there has been this wasteful expenditure, in another one this, but then I think NFSAS has to tell us what is the total that has been incurred and what are the remedial steps that they are going to take to prevent such to happen in the future. And Chair, how many ghost service providers in terms of accommodation? How many ghost service providers have they uncovered, and how many ghost students have they uncovered? Because those are some of the things that the students are complaining about. That is not all the eligible beneficiaries that are benefiting. There are those that are being created by the institutions themselves, and they are non-existent. Has NFSAS did that the research to find out as to exactly where does this money go, and all the funds that they are saying is deficit, when we request the National Treasury to increase their budget, we have to know where the money goes, because it's not all this money that is going to assist the education of the students. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mkonto. Let me recognize Honorable Bateman.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Good morning to all my colleagues, and thank you also for the presentation as well. Appreciate the fact that it was short and very much to the point. My first question relates to public-private partnership agreements. We were in the Eastern Cape last week and observed how university residences, which are older, are in some cases in a very, very poor state of repair. And obviously the budgets are very strained to be able to renovate those university residences. I would like to know if NSFAS has participated in any public-private partnership agreements which have enabled the restoration of old university residences. If there is a model of how this has been done or is being done, that other universities are able to learn from and implement involving public-private partnership agreements. Then secondly, just the matter at hand really here of the funding crisis. And firstly, an observation. It was extremely reckless, in my perspective, that this whole that there was no mechanism put in place to amend the basis for qualifying for NSFAS funding in order to fit within a budget. And I would welcome the recommendation that there should be a consultation with those various role players that you mentioned in your slide to amend and look at the criteria for qualifying for student funding and the sustainability of this. That makes a lot of sense. My concern is that we're already in October 2025, and it's very late to be reforming the student funding model for 2026. So my question is, firstly, has a date been set for this consultation process? Who's driving it? Where are we in that process? And secondly, when did NSFAS first sound the alarm regarding the budget overrun? And when did NSFAS first request that this consultation should take place? Thanks very much.
Honorable Kalega Mazibuko.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chair, may I also switch off my video for better bandwidth at the airport? Chair, the first one, in our visit last week to WSU, during the presentations we received from both management as well as students, the defunding of students came up very sharply, and that the students will be funded or will get a confirmation of funding, and they register, they get into academic year, and during the academic year, they are then defunded. So I would like the NSFAS team to speak on this. What's the reason behind defunding students, and what happens to those students that are defunded in the course of the year? Because I think that destroys the not only the academic year, but the students' education going forward. Chair, in terms of the scrupulous service providers, I would like to know if NSFAS has a way of verifying these service providers or a plan of verification so that we don't have this problem of scrupulous service providers going forward. And Chair, as regards to potential exclusion of up to 100,000 students in 2026 due to funding shortfall, how much of the funding shortfall arises from increased number of students qualifying for higher education versus rising cost of living, which pushes many households into the NSFAS eligibility criteria, as he has already said? Who between the DHET and NSFAS is responsible for the failure to ensure that NSFAS's cost projections are aligned with students' demands projections to prevent these exclusions ahead of 2026 academic year? What contingency plans are being considered now that contain cost drivers to avert the potential exclusion of up to the 100,000 students, as I said? My last question, Chair, regarding NSFAS's arbitrary mechanism to block students' registration and deactivate funding. Which existing legislation makes it constitutional for NSFAS to block students' registration? And how is this blocking practice consistent with the right to further education enshrined in our Constitution? What mechanisms are in place to ensure that lifted students' blocks after appeals do not result in lost academic year and high dropout rates and or low graduate throughputs, Chair? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Kalaga Mazibugo. Let me recognize Honorable Mwali Densiate.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Chairperson. This is not a party shirt. I want to check two things, Chair, with the NSFAS. Chair, regarding the issue of the late payment of the NSFAS allowance, has NSFAS done any assessment to determine whether these late payments, do they have any direct influence towards the violent strikes that we see in the universities? Because, Chair, I'm under the impression that if this then is not done, then sooner or later we would not have universities because they are being bent down by the students. And I'm also under the impression that in most cases, these are disgruntled students that have not received either their NSFAS allowances for meals. Some of them, they are academically some of them are academically excluded because of such a reason, and also, Chair, some, as Honorable Member Talega Masibu was mentioning, that they would have funding at the beginning of the beginning of the year, and then as the year proceeds, then they would be informed by institution that they've already or they've lost their they've lost their academic support from NSFAS. So I want to know whether NSFAS has done any assessment to really determine whether these late payments also have a direct impact towards these violent strikes that we are seeing happening. And also, what is it that the NSFAS has done to ensure that if there are instances of late payments to NSFAS payments to NSFAS allowances and any form of payments towards students, they are not academically excluded as a result of such? Because really, this is inhuman if you are going to have instances where a student, for whatever reason, from the side of NSFAS has not been paid, and then the student ends up losing the whole academic year or part of the academic year. And it is then pushed to be an issue of a student, whereas it's not an issue of a student, but it's an administrative issue between NSFAS and the institution on behalf of a student that has an approval of having NSFAS funding. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Mwali, and I appreciate your shirt, but we will discuss that offline in due course. Let me allow Honorable Siati.
Thanks, Chair. Greetings to all colleagues on the platforms and honorable members. Chair, I'm also just going to hammer on the deregistration issue that is emanating from our oversight visit. Would also just like NSFAS to just give us clarity on what are some of the contributing factors to us having to have a student that is deregistered in the middle of an academic year. And then the second question would be how many students are actually being funded by NSFAS at the Walter Sisulu University? Because there's been an issue there. We just want to have the actual number of students that are being funded out of the student population. And then aside from the proposed short-term plugging mechanism aimed at addressing the NSFAS budget deficit and cumulative liabilities, does NSFAS have any long-term fiscally sustainable funding framework to resolve its structural funding pressures linked to, amongst other things, weak financial forecasting and modeling, poor debt recovery from beneficiaries, and lack of accountability for irregular and frivolous expenditure? And if not, why not? Then, given persistent mismatches between allocated budget and expenditure, which results in recurring budget deficits, what corrective measures will be taken by NSFAS to reconcile disparities between allocated budget and actual expenditures? Those will be my questions, Chair, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Siati. Let me just before NSFAS responds, a number of...
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, there's
Mashid.
Honorable Gamede. Honorable Gamede, who is struggling to raise a hand. Yes, his hand, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
My apologies. Let me recognize Honorable Gamede.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm sorry. I think now that everyone is back to work, it's going to be easy for me to fast track this thing of getting my gadgets back. I'm sorry, Chairperson, for that one. No, thanks for the presentation from NSFAS. The presentation actually highlights the compounding factors contributing to the budget's deficit, including increasing student qualifications, cost of living crisis, and declining state resources. This multifaceted problem requires a comprehensive and sustained strategic response rather than short-term financial adjustments. The initiative to address payment-related issues for accommodation providers, including working sessions across provinces and resolving specific student payments discrepancies, demonstrates a commitment to operational improvements and stakeholder engagement, which is crucial for the stability of the student support ecosystem. Given the projected volatility and instability in the 2026 academic year due to potential students' intake limitations, what proactive measures are being considered to prevent a crisis in access to higher education for eligible students beyond just plugging the immediate financial deficit? My last question, Chairperson. The presentation mentions that NSFAS has used arbitrary mechanisms to block students from registering, which may also be subjected to legal reviews. What is the current status of these potential legal reviews, and what steps are being taken to ensure transparency, fairness, and legal compliance in student registration and funding processes moving forward? I would like to stop there, Chairperson. Later, if time permits, I will come with my recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Kamete. I'm wondering if that is party regalia, but that is, we can debate on another day. Let me raise this particular questions to NSFAS and then we can proceed. The first question is, I looked at, you make the point that thanks to cuts, you are 100,000 students short. I want to get an understanding what the percentage losses are to NSFAS financially, how many ghost students you've got on your system, and whether there's been an investigation towards that. My colleagues have raised this question of delays in payment. An institution like the Walter Sisulu University is heavily reliant on the majority of students there being funded, if not majority, close to about 80% is what the stat the university gave, are NSFAS students. So when there's a delay in payment, it does peril the state of the institution. Can I, CEO, acting CEO, if you maybe can indulge me a little bit? This wasn't part of your presentation, but I want to understand what is the status of the board of NSFAS. Have you yourself been finally appointed as a question, or how long is the intent? I'm not emanating from the board. Clearly, the CEO appointment is the next if you have been fully appointed. On the accommodation component, let alone the intersect between contractors who are scrupulous at certain instances, I want to understand whether NSFAS has got some form of vetting mechanism about accommodation. So let me give you the practical reality. When we were at a TVET college, students were staying within a facility there. There were two residences. The one had flooded in, and so, but the disbursements of funds seemed to have gone through. There was no recuperation of rebuilding of that. The second was in a mixed use facility. So students were being mixed with just residents. And now in a context of high levels of security questions, it may not be your job, it may be the job of the institution, but is there vetting? But you pay the bills. So I want to understand whether or not there is a form of vetting in that regard. And then maybe just for you as acting CEO to reflect on the question about the sustainability of NSFAS. When I look at your debt and your cash reserves, they look healthy now, but they progressively are being eroded thanks to, in the medium term, funding being cut towards NSFAS. And your ability to recoup funds from students, whether, have you reflected on the question from a policy point of view, whether you think there are other mechanisms where payments can be done differently? Secondly, in a context of an extrinsic relationship with the economy, has NSFAS considered whether or not, when there's a limitation of funding, which degrees are of economic benefit? Excuse me. And I say economic benefit, it can be a fairly philosophical question. That's perhaps maybe not where I want to land the response. I want to land the response at saying, has the Department of Higher Education given guidance to NSFAS regarding where degrees that are necessary in South Africa at this point in time are going forward? Let me use a practical example. My first degree was a BA degree in psychology, and perhaps it could have also been in biblical studies. But in truth, both those degrees, once you're done with them, you still are in need of further, especially a BA degree in psychology, you are still in need of further studying if you are going to give economic contribution to that. Now, NSFAS funding says you've got a 4-year funding gap potentially. If you fail one of those years, then it's the next year. But once you are done, you are done. So you could, in fact, be educating higher learners who end up unemployed. They can't do anything in that sense. And I'm just speaking maybe at the personal to generalize. So I want to understand from the CEO whether they've given thought to the fact that against reducing resources or constraints that are coming thanks to the medium-term expenditure framework, whether there's thinking that says, could we think what are some of the economic needs and how do we align so that we don't end up with students not being funded now, or funded but economically ending up in the same space where effectively they become unemployed. Now, we know research also tells us that when someone has a basic degree, their probability of getting employment is higher relative to someone who's just got a matric, which leads me to my last comment or question, which I'd like the acting CEO to reflect on, which is to say that there are 790,000 students who are writing, or somewhere around about there, who will be writing matric now. Not all of them are going to get bachelor's passes. So we can anticipate quite safely maybe just under or 50% of them could get bachelor's passes. Let's just hypothesize on this issue. The balance of those students either will end up at some TVET college or go somewhere. It does create the impression that there aren't enough spaces in institutions for learners, and therefore I want to know whether or not there's an opportunity where NSFAS is thinking hard enough about perhaps maybe to guide in, because you put in your slide a consultation that took place between the Presidency, Department of Higher Education, etc., about whether there's thinking policy-wise that can guide where we land the pipeline of students that are coming forward. Because in my view, we are producing a sufficient number of matriculants, many of them who are without bachelor passes. We undervalue TVET colleges, and the net consequence of that is that you don't have enough spaces in higher education for even those who pass with a bachelor's degree with a bachelor's qualification to be able to gain access to that. And then we undervalue TVET colleges, and in certain instances, the funding problem and the leadership at those institutions is often quite weak, but NSFAS is the one who pays the bills. And so I want to understand where there's been thinking around how we change course in that regard and begin to give a much more compelling higher education offer in this regard. And if you feel the question must best be directed at the Minister of Higher Education, I'm happy to do so. I just wanted to get your view in this regard. Let me allow NSFAS then to respond. Honorable Wakelin, I see you are putting some questions on the chat group here. And the question is about financial statements of NSFAS. And perhaps maybe CEO, you can, or the acting CFO can maybe speak to that once the acting CEO has gone through. Over to you, Mr. Karim.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson, and thank you to the members for the questions. So I'll start with Honourable Wakelin. Yes, one of the first steps that the newly appointed board and myself as the appointed acting CEO would have taken was the development of a turnaround strategy. And that has 6 pillars associated to it. One of the first fundamental things we identified was the lack of a sustainable funding framework. And we had initiated that as a process to ensure the long-term sustainability of NSFAS. 2, we had determined that the relationship within the higher education ecosystem between NSFAS, DHET, institutions, student bodies had broken down, and there needed to be a fundamental rebuilding of trust. As we know, NSFAS had, to a large extent, also faced governance crises in terms of lurching from one crisis to another. There was a commitment to ensure stability, both political and administrative stability in the organization, to appoint an effective leadership that could continue with the work of the organization, and to correct course by working with all Chapter 9 institutions and law enforcement bodies, including the Auditor General, the Public Protector, the Special Investigating Unit, in resolving the challenges. So we would have set course on that turnaround strategy, and we, of course, today's presentation did not require, but we would be happy to take members through the detail of the turnaround strategy and what progress we've made thus far, because we are of the view that we have made substantial progress in the first 7 months in implementing that turnaround strategy. Honorable Wakeland also asked about potentially institutions managing funds directly. Of course, the NSFAS Act enables us to fulfill the policy mandate of the Department of Higher Education and Training and the country mandate, right? But I think just in respect of, there's a broader reform process within the state about, what responsibilities the state takes for certain functions. But is to say, even when institutions managed NSFAS funds directly, it was not free from challenges. So we can argue which one may have been a better mechanism, but there were still many cases of corruption, maladministration, of bribes being accepted at institution level. And therefore, rather than pass NSFAS like a political football between institutions or DHET, what is important is that we implement the requisite reform processes to ensure the long-term sustainability of the fund. Another important question is around debt recovery. Now, unfortunately, seemingly the decision that was taken is that in 2017, when the shift was made from loans to bursaries, NSFAS's protocols and procedures around loans seemingly collapsed, and there was no willingness to pursue collection on the loan funds. There has been no write-off, and those historical loan holders do owe NSFAS funds that need to be paid back to the institution. And one of the steps that we've taken is to implement a loan recovery strategy, because we have a fundamental balance of about 45 billion rand that is outstanding to the organization, which in terms of the Public Finance Management Act must be recovered. One of the steps that we have taken is rebuilding our relationship with the South African Revenue Service. So we can check the employment as well as the asset and liability status of those loan holders and use that information to be able to drive collections. We don't want to chase poor people who don't have the ability to pay back, but those that have benefited, who signed loan agreements, who've gone on to be gainfully employed, who've accumulated assets, those people must pay the money back to the state. Yeah. As it relates to the building lease, the Special Investigating Unit had identified a number of irregularities associated with the way that the lease of NSFAS was procured. They had initiated a process within the special tribunal to be able to, one, seek termination of that agreement. Two is to recover any lost funds or where NSFAS did not ascribe value for money. NSFAS's position, both management and the board, has always been to support the SIU in that process. We saw no reason why we should have these plush offices, when students face the number of challenges that they do, and we continue to support that process. The latest report that we have from the SIU is that papers have been filed in the special tribunal seeking both Part A, which is the termination, and Part B, which is the recovery of funds. And NSFAS has made contingency measures should the lease then be terminated, in terms of us securing office space for our head office location. As it relates to the financial statements, one of the things that the board and myself inherited was this continuous late submission of financial statements. So NSFAS would typically submit financial statements in December, whereas the legislative deadline is the 31st of May. So when we were appointed, we assisted in finalizing the 23-24 financial statements and performance report, which has now been tabled in Parliament. We were not able to finalize 24-25 because of historical challenges by the 31st of May, but we fundamentally improved the submission. We made our submission on the 31st of July. And the Auditor General is concluding the audit process, and we intend to table the 24-25 annual report by the end of November. The intention then, Honourable Wakefield, is to ensure that going forward into future financial years, NSFAS will be back on the legislative cycle, which means financial statements submitted on the 31st of May and audits completed by the 31st of July. As it relates to the closeout project, we've made fundamental progress with universities, and we've set a deadline with universities for December 2025 for all historical closeout processes relating to the years 2017 to 2024. We then will have a methodology where within 3 to 4 months after the end of the academic year, the reconciliation is done so that what has happened during closeout does not reoccur again into the future. For institutions that don't comply with NSFAS's reconciliation processes. We are also exploring methods where we can withhold, for example, tuition, so that institutions also know that they have to comply with recon processes that enable us to produce quality financial statements. I want to then move to Honorable Mkhonto's questions. Now, if we look at the recent violent protests that have occurred both at the University of Fort Hare and the University of Free State, and we've taken steps to engage university management, engage the Department of Higher Education and Training, and in both of those cases, I think we can categorically say that those instances of protests were not related to NSFAS issues. At the University of Fort Hare, we know there are quite substantial issues between the Vice Chancellor's office and management, as well as the students and for example, labor in the organization. Similarly, at the University of Free State, the issue mainly related to the fact around the university changing its protocols around provisional registration for upcoming academic years. And we have opened up our doors to say, if any of the issues are related to NSFAS, in terms of our turnaround strategy, our doors remain open to helping institutions resolve disputes that may be present. Honorable Mkhonto, as it relates to issues around wasteful expenditure, once transfers are done to institutions, institutions become the custodians of those funds. We do reconcile them via the close-out process, but where there's mismanagement funds of institutions themselves are accountable through their own legislation and audit processes to account for any fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And as far as recourse on our own funds, but in terms of wasteful expenditure, institutions themselves also need to be held accountable for that. As it relates to ghost students and ghost accommodation providers, you have a situation where when NSFAS vets a student, right? When a student is classified as eligible for funding, there is quite a substantial process that goes about in verifying the existence of that student via verification of their ID numbers, via the Department of Home Affairs, their parental details, comparing them to the South African Social Security database, comparing them to the South African Revenue Service, so we triangulate the data. And then that student equally being vetted by the institution of higher learning as a student which is present. That makes there to be quite a number of checks that a student does exist prior to disbursement of funding for that student. Now, I'm not saying here that it is beyond the realms of possibility that there could be overriding of controls. And from time to time, our internal audit team will do spot checks to verify the existence of students. What I'm saying is you would have to go through quite an intrinsic process to override the entirety of the system to create a ghost student, both on NSFAS's side as well as the institution side. We do pick up instances where accommodation providers, and this is sometimes what creates issues between ourselves and accommodation providers, is accommodation providers will claim payment from NSFAS. And we'll say, well, if we compare this to our records, this student is not NSFAS funded, which also tells me that the controls in many cases are working here. Yeah. With that being said, I think we have to be alive to the fact that this is a very massive scheme in nature. It accommodates 900,000 students, and the propensity for controls to be overridden do exist, and we do continually look for ways to improve our control environment to ensure that students, one, are eligible, but two, that they are in existence. I think Honorable Bateman asks an important question about restoration of old university buildings and public-private partnerships, right? I think that NSFAS definitely requires the support of the private sector, or let me say the entirety of the higher education ecosystem requires the support of the private sector. I think we see that institutions, universities in particular, and of course universities that have an established track record, have a great fundraising ability, and they have the ability to collaborate and support students at a higher level. If we look at NSFAS in its current format, its performance, its audit report, its continuous scrutiny in the media, we are not in a position to really be seeking partnerships at this point in time. We do have good partnerships. For example, we have a partnership with the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants that I think it creates a progressive template for how we can partner with other institutions in critical skills in the economy. But I think mine and the board's focus has really been on stabilization of the organization, which has been our focus for the last 7 months, so that we create the platform for us to partner going into the 2026 academic year. I think Honorable Bateman asked another important question about when did we become aware. So universities have generally beyond the period of March to upload registrations of students. And during the month of April, we became aware that these we were heavily overexposed on the budget for the 2026 or 2025 academic year. We took steps immediately to alert the Ministry of Higher Education to the exposure that we were facing. And we took the very arbitrary step of saying, we cannot continue to register students when we don't have the necessary budget available. And that caused a high degree of volatility and instability. But we have to find the appropriate balance between enforcing our legislation as well as implementing the policy decisions of government. Of course, through the months of May, June, and July, we went through the reprioritization process with National Treasury, identifying funds that could be used to stabilize 2025. In parallel process to that, we would have started the conversation about the fact that this is not a sustainable funding model and that it's likely to perpetuate into the future. And we had activated the National Treasury, the DHET, and the presidency through DPME to say we have to establish a task team that will then implement short, medium, and long-term reforms to put the fund back on track here. Yeah. Honorable Mazibuko then asks about the defunding of students. Now, I want to say that this concept of defunding can only occur in 2 situations, right? Per NSFAS's policy prescripts. One, a student who has been funded can only be defunded if they do not meet the academic progression criteria for them to continue with funding, as is set out in the bursary guidelines, which is issued by NSFAS on an annual basis. 2, if information comes to light that in making an application, a student may have misrepresented themselves, they could potentially be defunded. And that is why we have the appeals process, which allows students to appeal either a decision on academic eligibility or financial eligibility. If there are any instances where members may have come where a student believes they have been incorrectly defunded, I would be happy to take those back to our team. I'll leave my email address and my phone number with honorable members so that if there are instances like that, we could attend to them. Honorable Mazibuko asks us about blocked student registrations. Yes, legally and constitutionally, we could be found wanting, and that is why we went through the reprioritization process to ensure that those students were enabled to register for the 2025 academic year. Because if we were challenged in court on our current bursary guidelines, it is likely that we would have been found wanting. But Honorable Mazibuko touches on a very important point around outputs. And I think this is going to lead us into the next couple of questions that we need to respond. Research suggests that NSFAS beneficiaries do perform better at university and TVET college. The wraparound support does enable students, when they're not worried about their next meal or their accommodation, to perform better, to graduate and to contribute meaningfully to the economy. However, we must also recognize the fact that current research suggests that 1 in 2 NSFAS beneficiaries who starts will never end up graduating. And we must confront the reality that a student who has completed 3 years of engineering and has fallen short at the final hurdle, the market will regard that person as a matriculate. Yeah. Now, we have to improve throughput and graduation rates if we want to see the scheme achieve a return on investment to the state. And I think that becomes very important if we want NSFAS to be a broader success to the South African economy. Honorable Mwali asks us about late payment of allowances. In the entirety of the 2025 academic year, there was 1 instance in April, where NSFAS paid TVET allowances about 12 hours late. We had a system deficiency which led to that. Throughout the rest of the 2025 academic year, I can categorically state that we did not have any issues with late payments of allowances. Yeah. And I think we've brought a relative period of stability to the payment of allowances. In the case where NSFAS fails to pay allowances, you will see a huge impact on students. And we know student groupings are very organized sector, and that can lead to destruction. And that is why we take our disbursements very seriously at the institution. Honorable Siate asks a similar question about defunding and deregistration, which I've responded to. But I think it's an important part that Honorable Siate also touches upon, is to say, you know, we can't continuously be saying we don't have sufficient funds to fund students who may qualify, but we don't have funds to be able to support them, when NSFAS has so much of maladministration, so much of fraud and corruption, right? And I think we definitely recognize that. And we recognize the fact that in rooting out corruption, rooting out maladministration, rooting out fraud, we can already improve the financial control environment that frees up funds that can be allocated to deserving students. And that is why we have offered our full commitment to the public protector, to the SIU, to law enforcement. And that is why the SIU has been able to recover 1.8 billion, which we've repurposed for student funding. So that conversation does not leave our minds in terms of implementing the correct controls there. Honorable Maimane, in terms of the status of appointment of the board, the chairperson of the board is in the meeting, Dr. Stander. I'll allow her to respond to that, just to also acknowledge the fact that the board's appointment was approved by Cabinet itself as part of the processes that it considers in due diligence and vetting. Honorable Maimane, you ask an important question about student accommodation, right? And I think there are two issues which we must face, or let me say even three issues. Is that, one, the current system does not effectively allocate student accommodation in a way that is fair and equitable. And that's what the protocol is aimed to achieve, is a more equitable distribution of current student accommodation. I think the other issue that we face is that institutions lack sufficient maintenance and capacity budget to be able to maintain existing residences to provide student accommodation. But the last point, and this is a very important point, is to say we face a structural backlog of about 200,000 bed shortage in South Africa of student accommodation, right? And yes, that is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because it's really an opportunity through a number of state institutions working together with the private sector where we can drive transformation, because the majority of these shortage of beds is in rural areas, and we can really use it as a mechanism to drive local economic development. Yeah. The sustainability of NSFAS, I think it is important for us to consider the fact that the current model is unsustainable, right? And I think we need to think about more broadly a question that we need to ask ourselves in terms of a number of things we've said. So yes, we must root out maladministration and use those funds. I think we have to review the suite of benefits that have been provided and say, does everything need to be there? And can some of those benefits be tailored so that funds can be released? Are there mechanisms that we can use to perhaps allow more students? Do allowances have to be increased every year, for example? Yeah. But I also think we need to ask ourselves a question about how is it that we provide coverage for young people who are leaving the basic education system and transitioning into higher education, right? Or transitioning into post-school education and training in any society. Not every single person will go to university. Even with the number of bachelor passes we have, which is projected to be 300,000 plus, we only have 200,000 spaces available at university, which means not everybody who gets a bachelor pass can go to university. Now, that's partially an infrastructure problem, but we must promote TVET colleges as a pathway. 95% of students apply directly for university, which means even when we place them in a TVET college, they don't necessarily want to be there. I don't think we've done enough to promote TVET colleges, but I also don't think we've done enough to promote alternative pathways through the economy for young people that look like National Youth Service, that look like entrepreneurship, that look like digital skills, that looks like short-term skills programs. And I think that's what the minister spoke about when he spoke about a re-engineering of the PSET system in South Africa. I fully agree with Honorable Maimane, is to say, and we have to fund degrees which are critical to the economy, which will result, an outcome of our education policy has to be employment and productivity, right? Because if we're able to achieve two things, one, if we're able to assist students in graduating and graduating on time, but two, if they're able to find employment, those students enter the workforce, they become taxpayers, those taxes allow us to create a self-sustaining system of education in the country. And I think that's ultimately the point we need to arrive at. We need to move away from an access conversation towards a throughput, graduation, employment, and productivity conversation. Honorable Chair, I'll pause our inputs there for now. I'll just allow the chairperson of the board, Dr. Stander, to perhaps give in inputs, and particularly maybe on the recruitment of the CEO as well.
Good morning, Chairperson and members. On the status of the board, we are still waiting for 3 members to be appointed, 1 by the Minister of Finance and then 2 by the Minister of Higher Education. As soon as that is done, we will revert back. The current acting CEO is still appointed in an acting basis. And the headhunters that we are using have just completed their long list and reached out to people on the long list to confirm their availability. This will be presented today to the HRR committee, who will be doing the vetting in the next week. And the panel for the CEO shortlisting is likely to set before the end of October. So we are in the process, going strongly with that. We did have a parallel process running with direct recruitment, which didn't really yield appropriate candidates. Thank you. I'll pause there.
I did think, if I wasn't mistaken, there was a question directed to the CFO, or at least it would have been covered by the CEO. I don't know if the CFO, the acting CFO, would want to make any comment.
The financial statements, Chair.
Yes.
Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. The response to the financial statements was covered either.
Sorry, there seems to be signal problems. Can you begin your response again, please?
Okay. The response in relation to the financial statement was covered by the acting CEO, that in the past couple of years, we were behind with presenting our financial statements, and we have subsequently come to catching up, and we envision that we will be able to submit the next year's financial statements in time, in line with the legislative requirements of submitting by 31 May. We are currently finalizing the audit relating to the 2024-2025 annual financial statements.
Now, thank you very much. Honorable members, there seems to be a few follow-up questions. I will allow at least a minute for each member who wants to ask a follow-up question, whilst we've still got the leadership here at NSFAS. Honorable Bateman, I'm not sure anyone else who want to ask a follow-up question. Honorable Bateman, you can proceed.
Thanks, Chair. My question is really if a date has been set to implement the recommendation from NSFAS, which was that for the 2026 academic year and the medium-term expenditure framework, a technical team of DHET, NSFAS, Treasury, DPME, and the Presidency be established to support the enrollment planning, reform, and sustainable funding framework for the university sector. I welcome what the CEO has been saying in terms of what needs to happen. The throughput model, I agree with. I think that's good. I think my question is really, where are we? Because we're already in late October, and we, from the numbers that have been presented to us, if we don't make some changes, are going to face a bigger problem next year than what we've even had to scramble around to solve this year. Yeah, has the date been set? Where are we at with those reform processes?
Mr. Karim, if you are still
Yes,
on
thanks,
the line.
Chair.
Yeah.
So we are at the tail end of concluding our financial projections for 2026, including some of our proposed reform measures. We have a preliminary submission to Cabinet tomorrow, which we'll be making, and then a follow-up in November. Our intention is for this matter to be flagged in the medium-term budget policy statement. But ultimately, Chair, I think what's important to also recognize is that we will propose the reforms that in our view need to be implemented for 2026. The policy is a country policy, and it's something that Cabinet itself will need to be able to resolve on in terms of how we take the sustainable financing and funding model for higher education forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the team at NSFAS. I mean, naturally, the conversation is certainly one that the country itself needs to have. So I look forward to the engagement with National Treasury and the MTBPS. The Minister of Finance will certainly be making a presentation in this regard. And ultimately, some of the questions that we're putting forward, I spoke to the chairperson of the Higher Education Portfolio Committee, and there's a discussion about having a joint session. So we would want to have a further engagement with NSFAS. But with that in mind, I want to thank you for the accommodating us, given that the appointment had been changed a few times. And I want to appreciate the time you have taken this morning in responding to the questions that honorable members have put forward. So I want to thank you, and I want to move on to the other business of the committee. So let me thank the team at NSFAS and wish you a good afternoon. You can exit the platform when it suits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Honorable members, in the light of that particular conversation, what we're going to do is I'm very committed to Mr. Magagula will have at least a preliminary report on our oversight visit by the end of the week. And I'm hoping that we can debate it and ventilate it so that it's out of the way before we get into the MTBPS conversation. So if members have insights that they want to put forward, can I recommend that you begin to put those in writing so that they can be included as part of our report and recommendations emanating from that? And certainly the reform of NSFAS is but one policy position that we need to have a long conversation about and put on the table as a point, because I think if South Africa goes through its weather patterns, it starts the year with a student protest, and then it moves to the middle of the year with a wage or labor negotiations, etc., etc. So what we cannot do is keep doing more of the same and hoping for a different outcome. So the reform question about how we look at NSFAS is going to be crucial as a recommendation that we put. So I hope members were able to glean some key points on that issue in reflection to the conversations on the University of Walter Sisulu, or the Walter Sisulu University. So if I can ask that you put those in writing and begin to submit them to Mr. Magagula. I want to get that draft report done by the Friday of this week so that early next week we can begin to adopt and then move on to the MTBPS conversation. In the light of that, I want to proceed to the 2 sets of minutes that we need to consider. So that we keep the meeting on the go. Can we begin? Denver, will you put forward the minutes of the meeting we held on a virtual platform to consider the term program for the committee? Can you do that? Thank you. Honorable members, this was a meeting held on the 7th of October, effectively considering the committee's draft program and minutes dated. This was a fairly procedural meeting. I don't think there's anything contentious in the minutes that are overly dramatic. It was really just to consider the term program, to give an update really on our international study tour, and then looking at announcements that look for the following day. So I don't think there's anything here that a member would like to amend. So I want to, at this point, if there are no objections to the minutes that are tabled before us, is there a member who would like to move for the adoption of the minutes?
Chair, I adopt.
Thank you, Honorable Waitlin. Is there a member who would like to second the adoption of the minutes? Let me recognize Honorable Kalega Mazibuko. Thank you very much, Honorable Mazibuko. Those minutes are now duly adopted. Let's move to the next set of minutes. Denver, will you put those up? These were our meeting that we held with the Minister of Finance, and there were a number of conversations that took place. And this was a meeting held on the 8th of October on a virtual platform, resuming early at 8:30. Can you proceed page by page? And then if the member would like to raise an amendment, if you could please put your hand up and I will recognize you at this point. If there's no amendments to these particular minutes, as have been duly circulated. Honorable Kalega Mazibuko, I see your hand is up. I recognize you, Honorable Member.
No, it's not for amendment.
It's not for?
Not for amendment, Chair.
Or not for amendment?
I thought you were saying, yeah, I thought you were saying we should approve. So
all right. I will get there. I will get there in a moment, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko. Let me check. Is there any member who would like to move an amendment in the minutes? There doesn't seem to be any amendments required. So, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko, I'm going to recognize you if your hand was up to move for the adoption of the minutes.
Yes, Chair. My hand was up to move for adoption of these minutes as a true reflection of the last meeting as I went through them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko. Honorable Mkonto, I notice your hand is up. I will presume it is to second the adoption of the minutes as a true reflection.
Yes, Chair, I second. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mkonto. With that in mind, both sets of minutes being duly adopted, I want to, in looking towards the close of the meeting, honorable members, tomorrow we were typically scheduled to have an engagement with the Department of Basic Education. You will notice two things have occurred. One is we've decided that given the engagement we had with the Department of Education in the Eastern Cape and both nationally, that that meeting is not crucial. So we're happy to cancel that particular meeting. But the second issue is the fact that the Minister of Basic Education will also not be available on the day, given some of the questions that are now being held over, even in the question and answer session, both the Minister of Education and the Deputy Minister of Education, given that they've entered the exam timetable, are both unavailable. So, honorable members, tomorrow's engagement that we're going to have as a committee has been now cancelled, and so we will then reconvene as a committee. If I can ask honorable members to make their submissions on the oversight conversation in writing, so that when Mr. Makakula reflects on them on the actual report, that they are captured in the correct sense that members would like to put forward, and then we will convene to consider that report and move on. So the major announcement, I suppose, is that the meeting tomorrow will not be taking place. I don't know if there are any questions from any members in that light. With no questions put forward, I want to then, in the light of that, Mashile, is there anything else I've left out?
No, you've covered everything, Chair. Thank you so much.
Denver?
Yes, Chairperson, from our side, during the meeting. Just for the record, Honorable Kwankwa has also submitted an apology.
Noted, and it will be duly recorded as such. Honorable members, with no further business of the day, I want to say there will be catering available in your private meeting points. It will be delivered to you.
So I'm going to claim in your office my lunch and my breakfast. I'm claiming in the chair's office.
There we go.
What?
In that,
What a good timing. I'm going to board now. What a good timing of ending of the meeting.
there
Don't
you
leave
go.
the chair.
Thank you. Honorable members, with that in mind,
Chair
the
for
meeting
president.
is therefore closed. Thank you very much. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Bye, everyone.